People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Now, maybe you've heard that statement before. Maybe it's new to you. I didn't make it up. It's been around for quite a while. But tonight I want to show you how that statement plays into your leadership and how that statement and the qualities that go with it will help to make you an effective leader. In my role as Dean of Spiritual Life, you can probably imagine I have a lot of spiritual conversations. And because we are a Christian university, we talk a lot about Jesus and we talk a lot about Christianity. I find that I have a lot of conversations with students that want to have those spiritual conversations, but there are students that don't want to have those spiritual conversations. I know their names, they know my name, we say hi to each other, they keep me at arm's length. They really don't want to talk to me because they know that I'm only going to talk about spiritual things all the time. That's not what I do, but that's what they think. What's funny, those students are probably the students that need to have spiritual conversations the most. Brian was one of those students. I've changed his name, by the way, but Brian was one of those students a few years ago. We knew each other. We said hello. He kept me at arm's length. I knew that he needed to have a spiritual conversation or several conversations just to kind of talk things through. And why wouldn't he talk to me? I mean, I have a theological degree. I have the answers. Well, I don't really have the answers, but I'd like to think that maybe I have a few answers that might get him thinking. Well, Brian kept me at arm's length, and we never had that spiritual conversation until I found out that Brian had to go into the hospital. So I asked Brian, I said, could I come and just pray with you before surgery? Because he had to have surgery. He said, sure, that'd be fine. So I went and prayed with him before surgery. I came back later that day to check to see how he was doing. And then I came back several times over the next few days because he was in the hospital a few days recuperating. And two things I learned from that. The first thing is, well, I never had a spiritual conversation with him during that time. But the second thing I found is that he really didn't seem to care that I was there that much. And it didn't hurt my feelings. This is what I do. I come, he's a college guy. Why would he care? Why would he drop a macho facade, say, I'm so glad you're here? Well, he didn't do that. And I thought, it's really not that important that I'm here. Well, a month later, he had to have a follow-up surgery, so I texted him. I said, hey, are you having surgery tomorrow? No response, confirming he really didn't care that I was there at all. He had the surgery, and I got a text from him the next day after a surgery. He said, hey, I did have the surgery. I'm sorry I didn't reply to your text. I'm in the same place. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go by and see him. I went by, and I stayed probably 2 minutes, because after all, he really doesn't care that much that I'm there. I didn't go see him the next day, or the next day, or the next day. He's supposed to get out on the fourth day. Early the morning of the fourth day, I get a text that says, can you call me? I'm like, yeah, sure. So I called him. What's up? He says, well, I wanted to let you know I'm going to be in the hospital 3 more days. I'm not healing as quickly as I did the last time. I said, oh, okay, that's good to know. I'll be sure and let the university know so they can let your professors know. Is there anything else that you need? He said, well, yeah, if you have a few minutes to come by and talk, that'd be great. I said, oh, I'll be there in an hour. So I went over there. We spent an hour together. And in the context of that conversation, I felt like I had some freedom to say, can we talk about spiritual things? And he said, yeah, we can. And then he said this, you are one of the few people I'll have this discussion with. I said, wait a minute. How do we go from being at arm's length the entire time I've known you to, you're one of the few people I'll have this discussion with? I said, why is that? I don't get that. Most people don't want to talk to me about those things. He said, ever since I went to the hospital and had surgery, you came by to see me several times. You have shown me that you care about me. I will listen to whatever it is you have to say. You see, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Now, right about now, you're thinking, John, I'm not a pastor. I don't do spiritual things. I'm in a business. I have numbers. I have bottom lines. I have goals. I have objectives. I have things that I have to do. We have metrics to measure. We don't have time for touchy-feely kind of stuff like this. Well, I want to make the case tonight that you must make time for touchy-feely stuff like this. Let me say this statement differently. People won't care how much you know until they know how much you care can be translated like this. Your intelligence quotient won't mean much if you have a low emotional quotient, if you don't show that you care. What is intelligence, or what is the emotional quotient? What is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is basically your ability to know your emotions and the emotions of others and navigate those and put those together so that you can produce positive and mutually beneficial ends for everybody involved. It's not manipulative. It's not so that you can have an edge and manipulate people. It's so that you can produce something positive for everybody. The emotional quotient is the measure of your emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence has 4 different components. The first component is this. You are self-aware. You know your emotions, and you know the behavior that flows from your emotions. The second component is that you are socially aware. In other words, you know the emotions of others, and you can kind of read their emotions, and you understand why they're behaving the way that they're behaving. A third component is that you are self-managing, or you have a self-management component. You're in control of your emotions, and you're in control of your behavior because of your emotions. And a fourth component is relationship management. In other words, now that you know your emotions and their emotions, you can have positive interpersonal interactions with people having that knowledge. So the question is, why do you need to have that knowledge as a leader? What is it that makes that knowledge so special to you? Here's what I want to do tonight. I want to sell you on why you need to have an emotional intelligence, why your emotional quotient needs to be healthy, and then I want to show you just 3 basic ways in how you can raise your EQ. Here's the first facet. If you are a leader, you must deal with emotions. See, leaders must deal with emotions because leaders and followers both act and react from their emotions. Leaders and followers are people. Everybody has emotions. There's no doubt about that. Many, if you think about this, many, if not most, of your leadership challenges either result from emotions or end in emotions. It doesn't matter if it's budget cuts or whatever it is, somehow there's an emotional component. Now I want you to think about your own leadership arena. In your own leadership arena, isn't it true that some of the problems that you deal with your subordinates are interpersonal problems? Those are emotional issues. Why do we even have grievance policies? Why do we have sexual harassment policies? Why do we have to enact anti-discriminatory laws? It's because of our own humanness. We act from how we relate to each other based on our emotions. What do studies say? Studies say this: 35% of workers have experienced being bullied at work. That comes from emotions. 16% of people say they've witnessed other people being bullied at work, which means over half of the American workforce has either been bullied or seen it happen in the workplace. And it gets even worse than that. 2 million Americans, nearly 2 million Americans have said that they have been victims of workplace violence every year. That all comes from our emotions. And one more bit of bad news. OSHA reports that most of the workplace incidents that stem from these emotions, they never get reported. And so what you see in your leadership arena, in your organization, only the tip of the iceberg. Everything else is underwater. See, people bring their emotions with them. And if you work with people, then you have to deal with emotions. Here's a second reason that emotional intelligence is important to you. Effective leadership hinges on having a healthy emotional quotient. Only 10 to 25% of effective leadership can be attributed to IQ or your intelligence quotient. See, that means that the smartest person in the room is not necessarily the best leader. And I don't know about you, but that's really good news for most of us, right? That we don't have to be the smartest room or the smartest person in the room. Let me tell you about a couple of studies that really help us to understand this. The Somerville Study showed us that IQ is not a good predictor of success. The Somerville Study studied 450 boys in Somerville, Massachusetts. It was a longitudinal study. They studied the boys as boys, and then they studied the boys when they became adults, and they looked at their success. 450 boys, 2/3 of these boys were from low-income situations, and 1/3 of these boys had an IQ of 90 or less. And here's what they found. They found that success as adults for these boys was determined by their ability as children to deal with and control their emotions in frustrating situations. If they were able to do that, they were more likely to be successful as adults. Here's another study in Berkeley in the 1950s. They studied 80 PhDs who were getting their PhD candidates, or that were getting their PhDs in some kind of scientific field. They gave them a battery of tests, personality test, intelligence test, to find out what was going on in their lives. They interviewed them. They learned everything they could about them. And then they came back 40 years later in the 1990s. They wanted to find out, were these people successful? And here's what they found out. IQ was important for them to get into the PhD program. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? You have to have some kind of IQ to get into a PhD program, especially if it's in science. And IQ was important for them to get a job in their scientific field. It took about an IQ of 120 for that to happen. But EQ was 4 times more important than IQ for professional success. Being the smartest person in the room does not matter in most settings. Leaders with healthy EQs have the edge. Here's a final reason I want to sell you on emotional intelligence. It's this. Healthy EQ helps the plan to come together. I just love it when a plan comes together. Don't you love it when a plan comes together? Nobody under the age of 30 is laughing at that. Healthy EQ is considered a major component of corporate productivity and missional effectiveness. In a 2011 Career Builder survey, 34% of managers said that they put a greater emphasis on emotional intelligence when they were hiring or promoting. And 71% of managers said that EQ was more important than IQ. Why is that? Well, people with a healthy and a high EQ, they're able to stay calm under pressure. People with a healthy EQ, they can resolve conflict effectively. And people with a healthy EQ, they empathize with other people in their team, and they have appropriate responses to those people. A Carnegie Institute of Technology study studied tech companies or technological companies to find out what makes these companies successful. After all, these are some of the brightest and most brilliant people in the world, so that's got to be the reason they're successful. But what they found out is that 85% of financial success was due to employee personalities and the employees' abilities to communicate, to negotiate, and lead. It's centered on emotional intelligence. Only 15% could be attributed to technical skill or knowledge. And you know, that really makes sense to us because you and I both know this. This is another study finding that we would rather do business with people that we trust and that we like, even if the quality of the product is less and even if it's more expensive. You see, healthy EQ helps the plan to come together. Now, hopefully, I've sold you a little bit on why you need to have a healthy EQ as a leader. Let me give you just briefly 3 ways that you can raise your EQ. The first way that you can raise your EQ is this. You need to know yourself. You need to know yourself. You need to examine yourself closely. You need to look at your thoughts and your emotions. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? You need to look at your words and your actions, and you need to ask yourself, what am I saying? What am I doing? And be aware of this, that what you intend to communicate can often not be what you're communicating at all. Now, many times, what we'll do is we'll say, I'm looking at myself. Yeah, I think I'm pretty healthy. I think I'm okay. Did you know that most executives think they're just fine when it comes to their EQ, and everyone around them knows that that's not true? So that's why you need something objective. And the first way to be objective is to basically take an EQ test. Let me give you a website that you can look at. It's called eiconsortium.org. It's the Emotional Intelligence Consortium, or Consortium for Emotional Intelligence, eiconsortium.org. And on there you'll find different measures that you can look into so that you can take some kind of EQ test. That EQ test will give you an objective reading of your emotional quotient so that you can be able to work on different facets of your EQ. That leads me to my second recommendation, which is you need to open up. You need to make time for others to examine you as well. Take the results from that EQ test, take them to trusted advisors, talk through those findings, ask for opinions on that, be vulnerable with people. I don't know about you, I don't like to do that. I don't want people to examine me because I'm fine just the way I am. But that's not true. None of us are that way. We need others to look at us. In fact, that leads me to tell you this. Along this open up section, maybe even take a 360 when it comes to your emotional quotient. Let your subordinates, your colleagues, and your supervisor all look at you and then take those results to trusted advisors. Work through those things so that you can increase your EQ. Here's a final way that you can raise your EQ. Listen with your heart, but also listen with your head. Focus on what others are saying, but also focus on what they are feeling. Remember what Stephen Covey said in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? One of the things he said was, seek first to understand and then to be understood. When we seek first to understand, we're not just listening to words, we're listening to what's behind the words. We're really trying to be empathetic to what people are feeling. And in that empathy, don't lose sense of your own emotions. Walk in people's shoes, but walk in other people's shoes, but walk in your own shoes as well. And stay in touch with what you're feeling and thinking at the same time. People won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And when they know how much you care, amazing things can happen. In 1969, President Nixon wanted to cut $20 million from the operating budget of the public broadcast system. Well, PBS felt that they couldn't lose that money. I don't think any of us could stand to lose $20 million. So they went to Senate subcommittee hearings, and the subcommittee was headed by Senator Pastore from Rhode Island. He was a pretty crotchety guy. He was a bottom line kind of person, not a touchy-feely person. So they sent their strongest negotiator to convince this man, and that man's name was Fred Rogers. Yes, Mr. Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. If you want to look it up on YouTube, it's a fascinating video. Mr. Rogers went into that Senate subcommittee, and Pastore said, well, Rogers, are you going to talk? You ready? Mr. Rogers began to talk, and Pastore had never heard of Rogers. He had never heard of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And Mr. Rogers began to talk in the way that we are all so familiar. And he said, I brought with me a philosophy statement, and I can read that to you. It would take about 10 minutes. But instead, what I'd like to do is tell you what we do and how we're trying to make a difference in the lives of children. And in 6 minutes, Mr. Rogers unveiled his heart and showed Senator Pastore how much he cared for children and what he was going to do to ensure that the children of America were going to grow up to be productive adults. And you know what Senator Pastore said at the end of that 6 minutes? He said, well, it looks like you got your 20 million. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Thank you.